Well, here we have the encouraging words of the Holy Gospel today. When anybody that comes to me without hating his father, mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters. So anybody who doesn't hate these people, get out. You don't deserve to be here. Oh, murmurs. This is such a hard gospel to understand. But what it's really talking about is, what's the price of being a disciple? What's the price? What could it possibly be? Now, of course, one of the things about the timing of this gospel is it would have been, read at a time where there was persecution in the church. And we know that for the first several hundred years, the Christians, because they began to break away from the Jewish practice of the faith, they began to include Gentiles, and so there was this disruption among families because one person was becoming a Christian, the other person was remaining Jewish. There was things where they were teaching was in regard to against the pagans, and so the ability to enter into the church was invited not just to the Gentiles, but also to the pagans, anyone. So there was this opportunity for families to be divided. It's not exactly the same analogy, but think about what happened when people chose up sides in a civil war. Families were separated, and we have brother against brother. And in fact, it wasn't until the Edict of Constantine at 313 that Christianity became the official religion. Up until that time, there were persecutions, and part of it was because there was the idea that Christians perhaps could not be trusted, to be faithful citizens. Part of it is because they wouldn't serve in the army. The other thing is that they made a convenient scapegoat for the problems, that the empire was having. Blamed the Christians. We've always found it convenient to blame others. And I think there's no doubt that that's going on today. We often have a hard time accepting differences of opinion. That's certainly going on today. You begin to demonize the other, and that's what happens. So Jesus says, if anybody comes to me and they're not willing to be able to endure this separation that may happen, and if they consider their life to be so precious that they don't want to get engaged in any conflict, not just the one among their family members, then you're not going to be able to follow me. And then he tells a story about what resources would you need to build a tower? And what kind of army, size of army would you need to successfully win a battle? And so at the end of it, he then says, and so if you are so, not addicted, but if you cannot see what the value of the work that you are doing, such that it might demand all your resources, like your possessions, then you don't have the ability to construct the tower. You don't have the ability to be my disciple. And that's where all these things that seem almost impossible to do. But we recognize that this kind of conflict goes on every day. How many people live in a family, for generations where there's been no conflict? Oh, okay, now you're agreeing, okay. Yeah. How many have children that you're trying to raise to be straight and strong and true, and they don't listen to you? How many times have you been surprised sometimes by what somebody has done, especially a child, and you're going like, how could you do this? One of my favorite stories is about where the mom had told the teenage boy not to go anywhere without her knowing where it is, not to go out with any friends unless she knew who they were, and certainly not to go to the mall without her permission. So it happened one day he wasn't where he was supposed to be, and she says, "Where were you? I've been trying to find you." And this was in the days before cell phones or even tracking devices. And he says, "Where were you?" So I went to the mall. She went to the mall? Uh-huh. Why did you do that? Well, everybody else was, Didn't I tell you not to go to the mall without me knowing about it? Uh-huh. And yet you went. Why did you disobey me? I didn't think about it. Why didn't you think everybody else was doing it? He says, why did you go to the mall? Oh, we thought we might meet girls there. If everybody jumped off the roof of a building, would you do it? He says, would be the girls be down there? And please forgive me for making such a stupid impression of a teenager. And I think I was channeling myself under different times. Why did you do this? I don't know. And that was a true answer, actually, to tell you the truth. I don't know. I just did it. You weren't thinking. That's right. Think next time, I'll try. So Jesus is talking to us to think about what we're doing in terms of being his disciple. And think if we're willing to spend the effort. What is the resource that enables us to be a disciple? It's faith. It's faith in God, faith in his word, faith in the eventual arc of his justice, faith in his resurrection, so that even if what we're doing gets us killed, as in the days of the early church, or even if today it creates a conflict for us with other people, our family or our friends or our neighbors. And that's certainly going on today in terms of, do you try to just go through life accepting whatever is going on, or are you trying to build the kingdom? See, that's the tower that's going to be constructed, not a building of stone, but a building of the Spirit, a building of righteousness and mercy and justice and peace and compassion. And if anybody thinks it's easy to do that, especially today, we find it so easy to blame other people for things without acknowledging, the pervasiveness of evil in the world, rather than it being located in any one particular ethnicity or. So, how do we challenge the distance between heaven and earth? How do we challenge the difference between, what passes for justice in this world and what God's justice is? How do we do it without conflict? You can't do it without conflict, but you can't enter the conflict without faith that what you're doing is the right thing to do, and it's something that God is asking you to do. Come on, you're parents, right? Parents, you die for your children. You would. You wouldn't even have to think about making a choice. You would do it because you would say, whatever it takes to protect this life, I will do that, whatever it takes. And because it's so much a part of your love, you're able to do it, at least in most of the time anyway. I've always marveled at parents that come into confession and they always confess that they don't have much patience with their children, don't have as much patience with their children as they would like. And I always say, are your children still living? And I think if you're wondering whether or not you have enough patience with your children, or whether you're a good mother or a good father, you probably are doing your best. At least you're examining how you're doing. And if you feel you're falling short, you regret it. I think you're on the right track. So don't beat yourself up too much. On the other hand, being patient is something that God calls us to be and to do, not only with those we love, but with our enemies. It's true. Boy, talk about conflict. Love your enemy. Do good to those who harm you. Return no one evil for evil. St. Paul said in this way, it'd be like piling up live coals on somebody's head. They wouldn't be able to ignore it. It would eventually perhaps win them over or help them to change their lives. Remember the story about the prodigal son? What happened to him when he came back after he blew his inheritance, and part of his brother's inheritance too? The father loved him so much he forgave him. Didn't sit well with the older brother. Conflict. But yet that's one of the stories in the Bible. Conflict between two siblings and a father. And by the way, anybody hearing that story that Jesus told would have said, that father doesn't know how to discipline his children. Both of them are very disrespectful. One's lazy, and one is willing to disrupt the family. In some cultures, the family is everything. And you don't disrupt the family. That's why when Jesus is saying, anybody who hates mother, father, sister, or brother, it's such a hard saying, but what he's talking about is, look, essentially, hey guys, I'm going to go die. I'm doing this not because I love my life so much, I don't want to get it injured in any way. I'm doing this because of the Father's will, and that's why I'm here. Even as part of Jesus' trying to fulfill the Father's will, he would say, Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass me by, yet not as I would have it, but as you would. And then what happened is then angels came and ministered to him. So one of the ways that you find that Jesus, endures the conflict of contemplating his suffering is he had backup. Angels came. He had support angels. And in the same way, we need to support one another as well. Let me tell you a story about somebody going through something, and it was the faith that made all the difference. Last week, there was a parishioner, and I got a call to go to the hospital, and there was Mom and Grandma, Italian, Nonna. All the family is there. The daughters, the grandchildren, everybody is there. Husband's there. And she's in ICU, and she's dying. And he said, please come. So he went. I go in, there's a woman with like a bandana over her head. And she's got tubes going into her for oxygen. And I walked in and said, hi. She says, hello. She says, I'm glad you came. Are you going to sing me a song? I thought, well, now this is not the normal fare for people who are dying, And I said, any requests? And she said, how about I Believe? So I started to sing the song. She started to sing. She sang right along with me, and then the family started to sing. Those ones who weren't crying. I believe for every drop of rain that falls, a flower grows. I believe that somewhere in the darkest night, a candle glows. I then heard later on, after we had said our prayers and said goodbye, and I said, you get to heaven before me, put in a good word. And she was dying, so we went to her house, and then she passed. And what happened is the father was telling me a story about all the people that came to the room in the hospital, that little cubicle, and says, in fact, when he was going back at a certain point, one of the nurses was coming out laughing. I said, what was so funny? It says, Mom was singing, when the moon hits your eye like a big pizza pie, that's amore. And so we found out that, and by the way, after she died, and I was leaving the house, I looked through my windshield and I saw that there was a double rainbow. The sky had been overcast, it had been cloudy, slightly rainy, and then all of a sudden the clouds part, the sun is shining, beautiful blue sky and fluffy clouds, a double rainbow, and all her family ran out and went up the hill, the green hill that's in front of their house. Their house is on a corner. It looked like something out of a scene from a movie in Ireland, as people were kind of like trying to get closer to the rainbow. And they're holding up their phones and taking pictures of it. And I got a picture of the daughter taking a picture of the rainbow. And what enabled that family to be at peace with this death? What enabled that woman to be joyful in the midst of dying? They all said it was her faith. And she acknowledged it was her faith. And tell you another mystery about this story. When one of the physicians, who was not the diagnosing doctor when she had been diagnosed with cancer, he was looking over the medical records, a chart, and he says, so I see that you were diagnosed with stage 4 cancer 6.5 years ago? And he looked at her and he said, guess what? You won. You won. And so she was able to see the grandchildren born. She was able to have, 6.5 more years with the family, which was so important to her. And she was such a wonderful mom. So, what resource are you using in your life to build the kingdom, to get through the conflict with your family, your spouse, your children? How do we possibly survive the things that come along the way of, trying to oppose evil and stand up for justice, or even just endure what happens in life, foreclosed homes, lost jobs, death of spouses and siblings and children? How do we get through that? Only if we believe. And the quality of belief is something that means you have to say, this is the most important thing. Anything else, is not as important. Remember, St. Paul said, I consider everything else that I used to treasure to be as rubbish when compared with the knowledge of the love of God. I consider everything else I used to treasure as being rubbish. So, how do we get there to that belief, that firm belief? I believe that even in the darkest storm a prayer is heard. I believe that somewhere in that great someone in a great somewhere hears every word. Every time I hear a newborn baby cry, or touch a leaf, or see the sky, then I know why I believe. Two people in the Middle Ages were doing the same work side by side. One was carrying a wheelbarrow with heavy stones in it, the other was carrying a hod full of mortar. The person came up and said, "What are you doing?" to the first? And the first put the wheelbarrow down, wiped the sweat from his brow, said, "What does it look like I'm doing? I'm breaking my back in this hot sun and not getting paid anything for it. That's what I'm doing." He asked the other person, "What are you doing?" He shouldered his hod a little bit more with the mortar in it. He smiled and said, "I'm building a cathedral." We don't build just for ourselves. We build for God. We're not here just for ourselves. We're here to build the kingdom. We're not here to give up when the going gets tough. We're here to pick up the cross and keep moving. And that's why Jesus, it was able to help give the time in the church for his followers to be saying, why is everything against us? And what he essentially is saying, expect it. But don't give up. Have faith. Follow me.